The smell of barbecue sauce and cigarette smoke hung heavy in my uncle's backyard as I stood by the weathered picnic table, trying to summon the courage to share my news. Memphis in late July was always brutal, the kind of humid heat that made your clothes stick to your skin and your patience run thin, but today felt especially suffocating. Family reunions had a way of doing that to me. "So, what's the latest disaster in your life, Casey?" My cousin Brandon leaned back in his lawn chair, beer in one hand, that familiar smirk plastered across his face. At 32, he'd settled into the comfortable routine of managing his father's auto parts store, and he never missed an opportunity to remind everyone how stable his life was compared to mine. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the envelope in my back pocket. Inside was a contract that could change everything, a partnership agreement with TechFlow Industries, one of the largest software companies in Tennessee. After 18 months of pitching my app idea to anyone who would listen, getting rejected by dozens of investors, and maxing out 3 credit cards to fund development, I finally had my breakthrough. "Actually, Brandon, I have some good news to share with everyone." My voice came out stronger than I felt. Around the yard, conversations quieted as aunts, uncles, and cousins turned their attention toward us. The evening sun cast long shadows across the patchy grass, and somewhere in the distance, a neighbor's dog was barking incessantly. "Let me guess," Brandon interrupted, taking a long swig of his Budweiser. "Another one of your get-rich-quick schemes? What is it this time? Cryptocurrency? Dropshipping? One of those pyramid things?" Heat rose in my cheeks, and it wasn't just from the Memphis weather. Brandon had been tearing down my ambitions since we were kids, but his dismissiveness had gotten worse over the years as I'd struggled to find my footing in the tech world. Every failed startup attempt, every job that didn't work out, every time I'd had to move back in with my parentes, he'd been there to point out my failures. "It's not a scheme. I developed a mobile app for an app." Brandon laughed, loud enough to draw more attention from the family scattered across the yard. "Casey, you've been talking about apps and tech stuff for years. When are you going to grow up and get a real job? Look at your cousin Mitchell, he's got a house, a wife, kids. He's building something real." I glanced over at Mitchell, who was flipping burgers at the grill, his polo shirt dark with sweat. He caught my eye and gave me an apologetic shrug. We'd always gotten along well, but he never stood up to Brandon's bullying. Nobody in the family did. "This is different," I said, pulling the envelope from my pocket with trembling hands. "TechFlow Industries wants to partner with me. They're offering me a contract worth—" "TechFlow?" My Aunt Linda looked up from the potato salad she was arranging. "Honey, that's one of those big computer companies, isn't it? The one with the fancy building downtown?" "Yes, exactly. They want to license my app and—" Brandon's laughter cut through the evening air like a buzzsaw. "Casey, come on. TechFlow Industries? Do you have any idea how ridiculous that sounds? You think some billion-dollar company is going to partner with you? You who couldn't even keep that job at Best Buy for more than 6 months." The familiar shame washed over me, hot and nauseating. He was right about Best Buy. I'd quit after 6 months because I'd been spending every spare moment working on my app, staying up until 3 in the morning coding and testing, arriving at work exhausted and unfocused. But that sacrifice had been worth it. It had led to this moment, this opportunity that could vindicate every risk I'd taken. "Brandon, if you would just listen." "Listen to what? Another fantasy?" He stood up from his chair, his voice growing louder and more theatrical. I could see other family members exchanging glances, some amused by the spectacle, others uncomfortable with the growing tension. "Casey, you're 28 years old. You've been chasing these pipe dreams for years while the rest of us have built actual lives. When are you going to accept reality?" My Uncle Robert, Brandon's father, finally spoke up from his spot near the grill. "Maybe we should let Casey explain what this is about." But Brandon was on a roll now, feeding off the attention. "No, Dad, Casey needs to hear this. We've all been too nice, too supportive of these delusions. You'll never succeed in tech, Casey. You don't have what it takes. You're not smart enough, not connected enough, not disciplined enough. The sooner you accept that, the sooner you can get a normal job and start living in the real world." The words hit me like physical blows. Each one was designed to wound, crafted from years of knowing exactly which insecurities to target. The worst part was that they echoed my own doubts, the voice in my head that whispered failure, every time I faced rejection, every time money ran tight, every time I wondered if Brandon might be right. I looked around at my family, people I'd grown up with, shared holidays and birthdays and graduations with, and saw a mixture of pity and awkward discomfort on their faces. My grandmother sat in her folding chair near the porch, shaking her head sadly. My parents were nowhere to be seen, probably inside avoiding the confrontation they'd witnessed too many times before. You know what your problem is, Casey? Brandon continued, his voice dripping with false concern. You think you're special. You think the rules don't apply to you. But the truth is you're just like everyone else, except everyone else is smart enough to know it. Something inside me snapped. The envelope in my hands suddenly felt like a lifeline, proof that every sacrifice had been worth it. I pulled out the contract, its official letterhead visible even in the fading daylight. This is a partnership agreement with TechFlow Industries, I said, my voice steady now despite the rage burning in my chest. They're offering me a 50-50 revenue split on an app one developed for inventory management. The initial licensing fee alone is worth more than you make in 2 years at the auto parts store. Brandon's smirk faltered slightly, but he recovered quickly. Casey, I don't know what scam artist sold you a fake contract, but it's real. I thrust the papers toward him. Call them yourself. Ask for Jennifer Morrison in business development. She's been my contact for 3 months. For a moment, uncertainty flickered across Brandon's face. Then he laughed again, but it sounded forced now, lacking his earlier confidence. Even if it is real, which I doubt, one lucky break doesn't mean you've made it. You'll find some way to screw this up too, just like everything else. The backyard had gone completely quiet now except for the distant hum of air conditioners and the occasional car passing on the street beyond my uncle's fence. The summer evening felt thick with tension and the smell of cooling barbecue. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Then again. And again. Excuse me, I said, pulling it out to check the notifications. My heart stopped. The screen was filled with missed calls, text messages, and social media notifications. The first text from my best friend Jeremy made my hands shake. Dude, you're on the news. Channel 3 is doing a story about local entrepreneurs. They're talking about your app. More messages flooded in. Saw you on TV. So proud of you. Mom. Channel 5 just ran the story too. You're famous, my former college roommate. Holy shit, Casey, you made it to CNN's website. Jeremy again? I looked up at my family, all staring at me with varying degrees of confusion and curiosity. Brandon's face had gone pale. Turn on the TV, I said quietly. What? Uncle Robert asked. Turn on the TV. Channel 3. Mitchell abandoned his post at the grill and jogged toward the house. A few moments later, we could hear the television coming on through the open back door, followed by the familiar sound of local news. 28-year-old Memphis native Casey Thompson has just signed a major partnership deal with TechFlow Industries for an innovative inventory management app that could revolutionize how small businesses track their products. The backyard erupted in shocked murmurs. Through the screen door, I could see my own face on the television, a professional headshot I'd taken for my LinkedIn profile 6 months ago, displayed prominently next to the Channel 3 Action News logo. TechFlow CEO Michael Rodriguez says Thompson's app, called InvenTrack, could save businesses thousands of dollars annually in lost inventory and streamlined operations. The partnership, announced this afternoon, represents one of the largest deals between a local entrepreneur and a major tech company in Memphis history. Brandon sank back into his lawn chair, his beer forgotten in his lap. The color had drained completely from his face, and for the first time in my adult life, he was completely speechless. My phone continued buzzing with calls and messages. Local reporters wanting interviews. Old friends congratulating me. Business contacts who had suddenly become very interested in reconnecting. We'll have more on this developing story at 11, including an exclusive interview with Thompson about his journey from struggling entrepreneur to tech success. In other news, Uncle Robert muted the television, and the backyard fell into stunned silence. Everyone was staring at me, not with pity or discomfort this time, but with something approaching awe. Casey, Aunt Linda said softly, is that really you on the news? I nodded, still processing the surreal moment. This morning I'd been just another family disappointment, another cautionary tale about chasing unrealistic dreams. Now I was being featured on multiple news channels as Memphis's latest success story. Brandon finally found his voice. I don't understand. How did they even know about your thing? TechFlow issued a press release this afternoon announcing the partnership. I guess it got picked up by the business reporters. I looked directly at him, and for the first time in years, I felt no anger, just profound sadness for his small-minded cruelty. This is what success actually looks like, Brandon. It doesn't always come in the package you expect. My phone rang again. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize with a 901 area code, local Memphis. Hello? Mr. Thompson? This is Rachel Martinez from Channel 5 News. We'd love to schedule an interview with you about your partnership with TechFlow Industries. Would you be available tomorrow morning? Around me, my family hung on every word of the conversation. When I hung up, the questions came in a rush. How long have you been working on this app? What does TechFlow do exactly? Are you going to be rich? Casey, I'm so sorry, I had no idea. This last from my grandmother, her voice thick with regret. But Brandon remained silent, staring at the contract I'd dropped on the picnic table when my phone started ringing. The official TechFlow letterhead gleamed in the porch light that someone had switched on as darkness fell over the backyard. As I fielded questions from relatives who had barely acknowledged my existence an hour earlier, I felt a strange mix of vindication and hollow victory. This was the moment I'd dreamed of for years, proof that my sacrifices had been worth it, that my vision had value, that Brandon's cruel predictions had been wrong. But looking at his defeated expression, I realized that his opinion no longer mattered to me. The validation I'd been seeking from my family paled in comparison to the satisfaction of knowing I'd never given up on myself, even when everyone else had. The Memphis evening was finally cooling down, and fireflies were beginning to blink among the trees at the edge of my uncle's yard. Tomorrow would bring interviews, phone calls, and the beginning of a new chapter in my life. But right now, in this moment suspended between my past failures and future success, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The absolute certainty that I belonged exactly where I was, heading exactly where I was meant to go. Brandon's laughter still echoed in my memory. You'll never succeed. But the news anchor's voice had been clearer, more authoritative. One of the largest deals between a local entrepreneur and a major tech company in Memphis history. Sometimes the sweetest victories are the ones that prove you were right to never stop believing in yourself, even when everyone else had given up on you. The Channel 5 News studio felt surreal under the bright lights, nothing like the casual backyard setting where my world had changed just 18 hours earlier. I sat in a plush chair across from Rachel Martinez, the morning show anchor who had called me last night, trying not to squint into the cameras. Memphis morning television was apparently a bigger production than I'd imagined. 3 camera operators, a sound technician adjusting my microphone, and a producer counting down to live broadcast. And we're back in 3, 2, 1. Good morning, Memphis. I'm Rachel Martinez, and we're here with Casey Thompson, the local entrepreneur whose app development success story is making headlines across the region. Casey, tell us how it feels to wake up famous. I managed a nervous smile. It's definitely surreal, Rachel. 24 hours ago, I was just another developer hoping for a break. Now my phone hasn't stopped ringing. Let's start from the beginning. What exactly is InvenTrack and how did you come up with the idea? The question I'd been preparing for all morning. InvenTrack is a mobile inventory management system designed specifically for small to medium businesses. I got the idea when I was working part-time at a local electronics store during college. The owner was constantly losing track of stock, missing reorders, dealing with theft issues. I realized there was a gap in the market. Existing solutions were either too expensive for small businesses or too complicated for non-tech-savvy owners. Through the studio monitors, I could see myself on screen, and I hardly recognized the confident-looking person speaking. After years of being dismissed and doubted, sitting in a professional television studio discussing my business felt like stepping into someone else's life. So you decided to build your own solution? Exactly. It took me about 3 years of working nights and weekends, learning to code, studying business management systems, testing different approaches. I probably went through 20 different versions before I had something I thought was market ready. And then you approached TechFlow Industries? I shifted in my chair, remembering those nerve-wracking months of cold calls and rejected pitches. Actually, it was the opposite. I'd been pitching to smaller companies, trying to get some initial clients to build credibility. TechFlow found me through a business development contact who had seen a demo I'd posted online. Jennifer Morrison from their partnership division reached out about 6 months ago. 6 months? That's a long negotiation process. Tech partnerships move slowly, especially when you're an unknown developer. They had to verify my code, test the app with their existing clients, run security audits, negotiate terms. There were definitely moments when I thought it would fall through. Rachel leaned forward, her expression curious. What kept you motivated during those uncertain times? I understand you faced some skepticism from family and friends. An understatement if I'd ever heard one. That's putting it mildly, I said with a laugh. Most people thought I was wasting my time. I had family members telling me to give up and get a real job pretty regularly. But I believed in the product and I knew there was a genuine need in the market. Speaking of family, I understand they found out about your success in a rather dramatic way? My cheeks warmed as I remembered last night's backyard scene. We were at a family gathering when the news broke. Let's just say some of my relatives were surprised. I bet they were. Now let's talk about what this partnership means financially. Without getting too specific, can you give our viewers an idea of the scale we're talking about? I'd rehearsed this answer carefully with the TechFlow legal team during an early morning phone call. The initial licensing fee is substantial, and the ongoing revenue share could be life-changing if the app performs as projected. TechFlow's existing client base includes over 3,000 businesses, so the potential market is significant. What's next for you? Are you planning to quit your day job? I actually already did, I admitted. As of yesterday afternoon, I'm officially a full-time entrepreneur. TechFlow wants me to be available for implementation support, client training, and ongoing development. It's both terrifying and exciting. Rachel smiled. I imagine it is. Before we go, what would you say to other aspiring entrepreneurs watching this morning who might be facing skepticism or discouragement? I looked directly into the camera, thinking about all the times I'd sat in my cramped apartment, wondering if Brandon might be right, if I was deluding myself about my chances of success. Don't let other people's limitations become your own. When people tell you something is impossible, they're usually talking about their own comfort zone, not your potential. If you believe in your idea and you're willing to do the work, keep going. Success might look different than you expected, and it might take longer than you hoped, but persistence pays off. Casey Thompson, everyone. Local entrepreneur and developer of InvenTrack, now partnered with TechFlow Industries. Casey, thank you for joining us this morning. Thank you for having me, Rachel. As the studio lights dimmed and technicians began removing my microphone, I felt a strange mix of exhilaration and exhaustion. The interview had gone well, I'd managed to sound coherent and professional despite my nerves, but the reality of my new situation was still sinking in. My phone had been buzzing throughout the interview with messages I'd ignored while on air. Now, checking the screen, I saw dozens of notifications. Saw you on TV. Way to go, Jeremy, so proud of you, son. Dad and I recorded it. Mom, Channel 3 wants to do a follow-up interview this afternoon. Unknown number. LinkedIn is blowing up with connection requests. My former college advisor, dude, you're trending on Memphis Twitter. Jeremy again. But the message that caught my attention was from an unexpected source. Casey, this is Mitchell. I wanted to apologize for not standing up for you yesterday. You were right and Brandon was wrong. Congratulations on everything. Can we grab lunch sometime? I'd love to hear more about your business. I smiled, remembering my quiet cousin who had always been caught between keeping peace and doing what was right. His message meant more than all the congratulations from strangers. The drive home from the studio took me through downtown Memphis, past the iconic FedEx building and the gleaming glass towers that housed companies like TechFlow. 6 months ago, driving through this area had filled me with longing and determination. Someday, I told myself, I'd belong in one of those buildings. Now that dream was becoming reality. My apartment complex in Midtown looked different somehow as I pulled into the parking lot. The modest 2-bedroom I'd been sharing with a roommate to split costs suddenly felt temporary, a launching pad rather than a destination. For the first time in years, I could imagine moving somewhere nicer, maybe even buying my own place. Inside, my roommate Trevor was watching a replay of my interview on his laptop. Dude, you're famous, he said as I walked in. My coworkers are texting me asking if I really live with the app guy from the news. I collapsed onto our second-hand couch, suddenly feeling the weight of the last 24 hours. It's crazy, right? Yesterday morning I was worried about making rent, and now you're probably going to be moving out and leaving me with the full rent, Trevor said, but he was grinning. Actually, about that, I'd been thinking about this during the drive home. My TechFlow contact wants me to relocate closer to their main campus for the first few months. There's a lot of hands-on collaboration involved in the rollout. Trevor's expression grew more serious. That's huge, Casey. When do you leave? Probably within the next few weeks. But don't worry about the rent, I can cover my portion through the end of our lease. My phone rang, interrupting our conversation. The caller ID showed a New York number I didn't recognize. Hello? Mr. Thompson? This is David Chin from TechCrunch. We'd like to do a feature story on your partnership with TechFlow and the InvenTrack app. Would you be available for an interview this week? TechCrunch. One of the most influential tech publications in the world wanted to interview me. I looked at Trevor, who was listening intently, his eyes wide. Yes, absolutely. When were you thinking? After scheduling the interview for Thursday morning, I hung up and stared at my phone. The screen showed 17 missed calls, 43 text messages, and more email notifications than I could count. TechCrunch. Trevor asked, TechCrunch. He shook his head in amazement. 6 months ago you were debugging point-of-sale systems for $15 an hour. Now you're being interviewed by TechCrunch. This is insane. The afternoon brought a steady stream of interview requests, congratulatory messages, and business inquiries. Local newspapers, radio stations, tech blogs, everyone wanted to talk to Memphis's newest success story. I found myself booked solid for the next week with media appearances and business meetings. But the most satisfying moment came around 4 p.m., when my phone rang with a familiar area code. "Hello, Casey? This is your Aunt Linda." Her voice was warm but slightly embarrassed. "I wanted to call and apologize for yesterday. We should have supported you more over the years, and Brandon feels terrible about the things he said." "Aunt Linda, you don't need to." "No, honey, I do. We watched your interview this morning and we're so proud of you. You stuck with your dreams when it would have been easier to give up, and look what happened. That takes real courage." After we hung up, I sat quietly for a moment, processing the emotional whiplash of the last day. The validation felt good, but it also highlighted how isolated I'd felt during the years of struggle. The support was wonderful, but it would have meant more when I actually needed it. My phone buzzed with another text from Brandon. "Casey, can we talk? I owe you an apology." I stared at the message for a long time before responding. "I'm pretty busy this week, but I'll call you when things settle down." It was a small gesture of grace, but also a boundary. I wasn't ready to pretend that years of discouragement could be erased by one successful day. As evening approached, I stood on my apartment balcony looking out over Memphis. The city lights were beginning to twinkle in the gathering dusk, and somewhere out there were thousands of people who had seen my face on television this morning, who now knew my name and my story. Tomorrow would bring more interviews, more opportunities, more of the surreal experience of being recognized as an overnight success after years of invisible struggle. But tonight, I allowed myself to simply absorb the magnitude of what had happened. 24 hours ago, I'd been defending my dreams against family ridicule. Now those dreams were being celebrated on television and in newspapers across the region. Sometimes success isn't just about achieving your goals, it's about proving that the voice inside you that whispered, "Keep going," was stronger and more accurate than all the voices around you that said, "Give up." And sometimes, if you're very lucky, the world notices just when you need it most. 3 weeks later, I sat in the passenger seat of a Tesla Model S, cruising through Nashville's downtown district on my way to TechFlow's headquarters. My life had become a blur of hotel rooms, conference calls, and media appearances since the news broke. The TechCrunch article had generated even more attention than the local news coverage, leading to interviews with Forbes, Entrepreneur Magazine, and a dozen tech podcasts. InvenTrack was being called the inventory management solution small businesses have been waiting for, and my personal story was being held up as an example of persistence paying off. "First time seeing the campus?" asked Jennifer Morrison, TechFlow's Director of Business Development, who had picked me up from the airport. We'd spoken dozens of times over the phone during the months of negotiation, but this was only our second face-to-face meeting. "First time in Nashville, actually," I admitted, watching the city's impressive skyline pass by. "Memphis and Nashville might as well be different states sometimes." Jennifer laughed. "That's Tennessee for you. But you're going to love working here. The energy in Nashville's tech scene is incredible right now." The TechFlow building was everything I'd imagined when I'd first started dreaming about partnering with a major company. 30 floors of glass and steel rising from the heart of Music City's business district. The lobby featured a waterfall wall and interactive displays showcasing the company's various software solutions. My app would soon be featured among them. "Casey Thompson." A booming voice echoed across the marble floor as we entered. Michael Rodriguez, TechFlow's CEO, approached with the kind of confident stride that commanded attention. He was younger than I'd expected, probably early 40s, with the casual yet expensive dress style common among successful tech executives. "Mr. Rodriguez, it's great to finally meet you in person." His handshake was firm, accompanied by the practiced warmth of someone accustomed to making people feel comfortable quickly. "Michael, please. And likewise. I've been following your media tour, very impressive. You're a natural in front of the cameras." As he led me toward the elevators, I caught glimpses of the bustling activity throughout the building. Employees moved purposefully through modern workspaces, their casual attire and collaborative energy reflecting the innovative culture TechFlow had built. "The integration team is excited to walk you through our rollout timeline," Michael said as we rode the elevator to the 15th floor. "We're targeting full deployment to our existing client base within 8 weeks. That's ambitious, but your app is remarkably well designed for rapid implementation." The conference room where we gathered offered a panoramic view of Nashville's skyline, with the Cumberland River winding through the distance. Around the polished table sat 8 TechFlow executives, each with tablets and printed reports detailing various aspects of the InvenTrack integration. "Let's start with the technical specifications," said Brian Walsh, the Chief Technology Officer. "Casey, we've completed our security audit and performance testing. I have to say, for a solo developer, your code architecture is exceptionally clean. We found very few areas that needed modification." The praise felt surreal. 6 months ago, I'd been second-guessing every line of code, wondering if my self-taught programming skills were sufficient for a professional-grade product. Now one of the region's top tech companies was validating my work in the most concrete way possible. For the next 4 hours, we dissected every aspect of the partnership. Marketing strategies, customer support protocols, revenue projections, expansion possibilities. The numbers were staggering. If InvenTrack performed as projected, my share of the revenue could reach 7 figures within the first year. "There is one challenge we need to discuss," said Sarah Kim, the VP of Customer Success. "We're already getting inquiries from businesses outside our current client base who want access to InvenTrack. The media coverage has generated significant demand." Michael leaned forward. "Casey, how would you feel about expanding beyond our initial agreement? We're thinking about developing InvenTrack as a standalone product, not just an add-on for existing TechFlow clients." My heart raced. This was beyond anything I'd imagined when I'd first started coding late nights in my Memphis apartment. "What would that look like?" "Potentially a separate app launch with you as the public face," Jennifer explained. "Your personal story has resonated with a lot of entrepreneurs. We could position this as Casey Thompson's InvenTrack, powered by TechFlow. You'd retain creative control and a larger revenue share in exchange for active involvement in marketing and development." I stared out at the Nashville skyline, processing the implications. This wasn't just about licensing my app anymore, they were offering to build an entire brand around my work. "I'm definitely interested," I said. "What's the timeline?" "Fast," Michael admitted. "We'd want to capitalize on your current media momentum. Think you could handle relocating to Nashville full-time? We'd provide housing assistance and a substantial signing bonus." The meeting concluded with tentative agreements and follow-up calls scheduled for later in the week. As Jennifer drove me back to the airport, I felt the familiar mixture of excitement and terror that had become my constant companion since the news broke. "You okay?" Jennifer asked, glancing over as we sat in traffic. "You've been quiet since we left the office." "Just processing everything. 3 weeks ago I was worried about making rent. Now you're talking about building a brand around my name." "It's a lot to absorb," she agreed. "But Casey, I want you to know this isn't just about capitalizing on media attention. Your app genuinely solves problems for businesses. We've been looking for an inventory management solution for years, and nothing on the market met our standards. What you built is exactly what we needed." The flight back to Memphis gave me time to think about how dramatically my life had changed. Looking down at the Tennessee landscape from 30,000 feet, I tried to reconcile the person I'd been a month ago with the person I was becoming. The kid who'd been mocked at family gatherings for his unrealistic dreams was now being courted by Fortune 500 companies. My phone buzzed with a text from Brandon. "Saw the Forbes article. Incredible stuff. Still hoping we can talk when you have time." I'd been avoiding his calls and messages for weeks, not out of spite, but because I genuinely didn't know what to say. His cruelty had been real and painful, but so had my own self-doubt. In some ways, his harsh words had only echoed the fears I'd carried about my own potential. Another message came in from Mitchell. "Family's planning a celebration dinner for you next weekend. Hope you can make it. Everyone's really proud." The idea of facing my extended family again felt both appealing and anxiety-provoking. Would they treat me differently now? Would the same relatives who had dismissed my ambitions suddenly want to claim credit for my success? As we descended toward Memphis International Airport, the city lights spread out below like a familiar constellation. Despite all the opportunities opening up elsewhere, this was still home. These were still my people, complicated relationships and all. The Uber ride from the airport to my apartment took me through neighborhoods where I'd grown up, past the community college where I'd first learned to code, by the electronics store where the idea for InvenTrack had first occurred to me. Each landmark felt like a waypoint in a journey that had led to this moment. Trevor was waiting with takeout from my favorite local restaurant and a bottle of champagne he'd been saving for a special occasion. "So, how did it go?" I collapsed onto our couch, suddenly exhausted. "They want to expand the partnership. Potentially move me to Nashville full-time and build an entire product line around the app. Holy shit, Casey. That's huge. He poured champagne into two mismatched glasses. Are you going to do it? I think so. It's everything I've been working toward. I sipped the champagne, feeling the bubbles on my tongue. But it's also terrifying. What if I can't live up to the expectations? What if this is all a fluke? Dude, you built something that a billion-dollar company wants to feature. That's not a fluke. That's talent and hard work paying off. We spent the evening going through the mountain of messages, emails, and interview requests that had accumulated during my day in Nashville. Business inquiries from companies wanting similar apps. Speaking requests from entrepreneurship conferences. A literary agent who thought my story would make a good book. Look at this one, Trevor said, holding up his laptop. The Memphis Business Journal wants to name you their Entrepreneur of the Year. The ceremony is in December. Entrepreneur of the Year. In a city where I'd struggled to get anyone to take my business ideas seriously, I was now being recognized as a leading example of innovation and success. My phone rang, displaying my mother's contact photo. Hi, Mom. Casey, honey, how was Nashville? Did everything go well with the meetings? Really well. They're talking about expanding the partnership significantly. That's wonderful, sweetheart. Listen, I wanted to ask you about this family dinner Mitchell mentioned. Would you be comfortable with that? I know things with Brandon have been complicated. I appreciated her sensitivity. My parents had watched me struggle with family dynamics for years, and they understood that success didn't automatically erase the pain of being constantly dismissed and discouraged. I think I'm ready for it, Mom. But maybe you could let everyone know that I'm not looking for big apologies or dramatic scenes. I just want to enjoy a normal family meal. Of course. We're all just so proud of you, Casey. Your father keeps showing that Forbes article to everyone at work. After hanging up, I sat quietly in my apartment, looking around at the space that had been my refuge during the difficult years. The second-hand furniture, the corner where I'd set up my development workspace, the kitchen table where I'd eaten countless meals while coding late into the night. Soon I'd probably be packing all of this up and moving to Nashville, starting another chapter in what felt like someone else's life story. The thought was both exciting and melancholic. My laptop chimed with a new email from a tech conference in Austin, inviting me to be a keynote speaker about From Rejection to Recognition, Building Success Against the Odds. 6 months ago, I'd been the cautionary tale. Now I was being asked to inspire others facing similar struggles. As I prepared for bed, I thought about Brandon's text message and decided it was time to respond. Let's grab lunch next week. I'll call you when I get back from my next Nashville trip. It was time to close some loops, to face the past honestly while moving confidently into the future. Success, I was learning, wasn't just about achieving your goals, it was about having the grace to handle both the people who had doubted you and the unexpected weight of being proven right. Tomorrow would bring more interviews, more decisions, more of the surreal experience of living a life that had once seemed impossible. But tonight, in the quiet of my Memphis apartment, I felt something deeper than vindication or excitement. I felt the profound satisfaction that comes from never giving up on yourself, even when everyone else has given up on you. And that, more than any partnership deal or media coverage, was the real victory. 6 months after that transformative family gathering, I stood in the ballroom of the Peabody Hotel in Memphis, looking out at a crowd of 300 business leaders, entrepreneurs, and community members who had gathered for the Memphis Business Journal's annual awards ceremony. The ornate chandelier cast warm light across tables filled with the city's most successful professionals, and somewhere in the audience sat my entire extended family, including Brandon. Ladies and gentlemen, the MC announced from the podium, this year's Entrepreneur of the Year award goes to someone whose story embodies the spirit of innovation and perseverance that drives Memphis forward. From a small apartment in Midtown to partnership with one of the South's largest tech companies, Casey Thompson has shown us what's possible when vision meets determination. The applause was thunderous as I made my way to the stage, past tables of people I'd once only dreamed of sitting among. The Memphis business community that had seemed so inaccessible during my struggling years was now celebrating me as one of their own. Thank you, I said, accepting the crystal award that felt surprisingly heavy in my hands. 6 months ago, I was debugging software for $15 an hour and living paycheck to paycheck. Tonight, InvenTrack has been implemented in over 5,000 businesses across the Southeast, with expansion to national markets beginning next quarter. I paused, finding my family's table in the crowd. My parents beamed with pride, my grandmother wiped tears from her eyes, and even Brandon was applauding enthusiastically. But this award isn't just about business success. It's about the power of believing in yourself when nobody else does, and the importance of supporting each other's dreams instead of tearing them down. Memphis gave me everything I needed to succeed: education, opportunity, and eventually, recognition. I'm proud to call this city home. After the ceremony, the networking reception buzzed with conversations about deals, partnerships, and opportunities. I found myself at the center of multiple discussions about potential collaborations, speaking engagements, and investment opportunities. The same people who might have overlooked me a year ago were now eager to associate with my success. Casey. A familiar voice called from across the room. Mitchell approached with a huge grin, followed by several other family members. Incredible speech, man. We're all so proud. Thanks, Mitchell. It means a lot to have everyone here. Listen, he said, glancing around to make sure we had some privacy. Brandon's been wanting to talk to you all evening, but he's nervous about approaching. Think you could spare a few minutes for him? I looked across the reception and saw Brandon standing by himself near the bar, nursing a drink and occasionally glancing in my direction. He looked different than I remembered, smaller somehow, less sure of himself. Sure, I said. Send him over. A few minutes later, Brandon approached hesitantly, holding 2 glasses of champagne. Congratulations, Casey. Really. You deserve all of this. Thank you. I accepted the champagne, studying his face. The arrogant smirk that had defined so many of our interactions was completely absent. I know I owe you a real apology, he continued. Not just for that night at the barbecue, but for years of, well, for being a complete ass about your dreams. We found a quieter corner of the ballroom, away from the networking conversations and congratulatory handshakes. Brandon, you don't need to. Yes, I do. I've been thinking about this for months. He took a sip of his champagne, gathering courage. The truth is, I was jealous. You were brave enough to chase something you believed in, and I was stuck in a job I hated, taking it out on you because your ambition made me feel small. His honesty surprised me. I'd expected defensiveness or excuses, not this level of self-reflection. I convinced myself I was being practical, realistic, helpful even. But really, I was just scared of what it would mean if you succeeded. Because if you could make it work, what was my excuse for not trying? I thought about all the times I'd fantasized about this moment, Brandon admitting he was wrong, acknowledging the pain his words had caused. But now that it was happening, I felt more sadness than satisfaction. I appreciate you telling me this, I said. Those years were hard, feeling like my own family didn't believe in me. I know, and I'm sorry. Really, truly sorry. He paused, looking around the elegant ballroom. Can I ask you something? How did you keep going when everyone was telling you to quit? It was a question I'd been asked in dozens of interviews over the past months, but hearing it from Brandon felt differente, more personal, more important. I think I realized that their doubts said more about their limitations than mine. When you told me I'd never succeed, you were really saying that you couldn't imagine succeeding in that situation. But I wasn't you, and my dreams weren't your dreams. Brandon nodded slowly. That makes sense. I guess I projected my own fears onto your situation. What are you going to do now? I asked. Are you still at the auto parts store? Actually, no. I quit last month. His expression brightened slightly. I'm starting a photography business. It's small scale for now, mostly weddings and events, but it's something I actually enjoy. Watching what you accomplished gave me the courage to take a risk of my own. The irony wasn't lost on me. Brandon, who had spent years mocking my entrepreneurial ambitions, was now following a similar path. That's great, Brandon. I'm happy for you. Would you, he hesitated, then continued, would you maybe be willing to grab lunch sometime? Not to talk about business or anything, just to, I don't know, start over? I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the bully who had tormented my dreams, but a person who was genuinely trying to grow and change. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't just about him. It was about freeing myself from the weight of old resentments. I'd like that, I said. Call me next week. The relief on his face was immediate and genuine. Thank you, Casey. Really. As the evening wound down, I found myself on the hotel's rooftop terrace with my parents, looking out over the Memphis skyline. The Mississippi River glowed silver under the December moon, and the city lights stretched endlessly in all directions. We're so proud of you, my father said, putting his arm around my shoulders. Not just for the business success, but for how you've handled everything. The interviews, the recognition, even dealing with family drama. You've shown real character. Thanks, Dad. That means everything. What's next? My mother asked. Are you happy in Nashville? I'd been splitting time between Nashville and Memphis since accepting TechFlow's expanded partnership offer. The arrangement worked well professionally, but I'd been increasingly homesick for the city that had shaped me. Actually, I have some news about that. TechFlow agreed to let me establish a satellite office here in Memphis. I'll still travel to Nashville regularly, but I can be based here full-time. Both my parents smiled. That's wonderful, honey. This is where you belong. My phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer Morrison. Saw the award ceremony photos on LinkedIn. Congratulations. Ready for tomorrow's call with the venture capital firm. Tomorrow would bring another milestone, a meeting with investors interested in funding InvenTrack's expansion into international markets. The numbers being discussed were beyond anything I could have imagined during those late nights of coding in my cramped apartment. But standing on this rooftop with my parents, looking out over the city where I'd struggled and dreamed and finally succeeded, I felt something more valuable than financial prosperity. I felt the deep satisfaction that comes from staying true to yourself despite the doubt and discouragement of others. There's one more thing, I said, pulling out my phone to show them a LinkedIn message I'd received that afternoon. The Memphis Startup Accelerator wants me to mentor young entrepreneurs. I'm thinking about saying yes. The message was from Carmen, the teenager I'd met at my restaurant who had reminded me of my younger self, full of passion but facing family skepticism about pursuing her dreams. Casey, I just wanted you to know that watching your story unfold gave me the courage to apply to culinary school. My family finally understands that following your passion isn't impractical. It's the only practical choice for someone who knows what they're meant to do. Thank you for showing me what's possible. Reading her words, I realized that success wasn't just about achieving personal goals. It was about creating a ripple effect, inspiring others to believe in themselves and pursue their own dreams despite the inevitable voices of doubt. I think mentoring sounds perfect, my mother said. You remember what it was like to need someone to believe in you. As we prepared to leave the hotel, I took one last look around the ballroom where I'd just been honored as Entrepreneur of the Year. 6 months ago, this same room might have intimidated me. Now it felt like a natural extension of the journey I'd been on all along. The drive home took me through neighborhoods where I'd grown up, past the community college where I'd learned to code, by the apartment where InvenTrack had been born. Each landmark told part of the story of how dreams become reality when they're backed by persistence and self-belief. At a red light downtown, I noticed a billboard advertising TechFlow's latest services, featuring a photo of the InvenTrack interface and the tagline, "Innovation starts with vision." My app, born in a Memphis apartment, was now advertised on billboards across multiple cities. My phone rang as I pulled into my driveway, a much nicer house in East Memphis that I'd purchased 3 months earlier. Casey? This is Robert Chin from TechCrunch. We'd love to do a follow-up feature about your first year post-launch. Are you available for an interview next week? A year ago, I would have been starstruck by a call from TechCrunch. Now, while still honored by their interest, I felt the confidence that comes from knowing you belong in those conversations. Absolutely. Let me check my calendar. Inside my new house, I sat in the home office where I now worked on InvenTrack's continued development and expansion. The walls were decorated with framed articles about my success, photos from speaking engagements, and the Entrepreneur of the Year award I'd received that evening. But the item I treasured most was a simple handwritten note from my grandmother, framed on my desk. Casey, I always knew you were special, but I didn't understand what that meant until I saw you on the news. You didn't just achieve success, you showed all of us what's possible when you never give up on yourself. Love, Grandma. As I prepared for bed, I thought about that family barbecue 6 months earlier, when Brandon's laughter had echoed across my uncle's backyard. You'll never succeed. The local news anchor's voice from that same evening had proven more prophetic. One of the largest deals between a local entrepreneur and a major tech company in Memphis history. Sometimes the most important victories aren't just about proving others wrong, they're about proving to yourself that the voice inside you that whispers, "Keep going," is stronger and more reliable than all the voices around you that say, "Give up." Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and new chances to inspire others who were fighting their own battles against doubt and discouragement. But tonight, in the quiet of my Memphis home, I felt the profound peace that comes from living a life aligned with your deepest purpose. Brandon's cruel prediction had been wrong in every possible way. But the real revelation wasn't his failure of imagination, it was the discovery that success, when it finally comes, is sweetest when it's shared with others who are just beginning their own journeys toward impossible dreams. And that generosity of spirit, more than any award or recognition, was the true measure of how far I'd traveled from that painful evening in my uncle's backyard.